My name is Taylor Freeman. I've been vegan for roughly 5 years now, and I'm an active volunteer with the Vancouver Animal Defense League and also Liberation BC. I became vegan for health reasons. Originally, I was, having a little too much fun, things like alcohol, and I got my body in a really bad spot, and I knew something needed to change. So all I knew was, fruits and vegetables were really healthy, so I needed to start on a path with kind of incorporating those more into my diet. And I don't know what it was. One day I woke up and I was just like, well, can you just live off of fruits and vegetables and survive? And do I necessarily need all these meat and cheeses that were, when I was starting to look into it, weren't making that much sense why I was eating it in the first place. It just wasn't really following in line with my values. So once I, started kind of a deeper thought process towards everything, it turned out that, I was doing good off the plants I was eating at the time, and I just wanted to see where I could take it. And that kind of blossomed furthermore into me, going full vegan. Well, when I told my friends and family that I wasn't eating animal products anymore, there was a lot of arguments to be had. And yeah, a lot of pushback. So I needed to find a way to educate myself, give myself the vocabulary on how what I was doing that made sense to me could make sense to other people as well. And the more I looked into it, the more I started seeing, the cruelty come into play. And I started finding myself watching documentary after documentary. Earthlings was a really good one. It was free at the time on earthlings.com. And that kind of hit the switch, and the fire that was already kind of inside me from when I was a kid thinking about this kind of stuff, it all came to fruition. And from that point on, it had to be about ethics. My health was one thing, but I'd been on diets, I'd been off of diets all my life. But the one thing that I always wanted to stick to was the ethics behind it. And after seeing the cruelty and the torture that happens to animals and for our day-to-day products, it had to stay. I started into advocacy because doing advocacy in my day-to-day with my friends and family, I guess I just became that, that annoying vegan that stopped getting invited to parties and stuff like that. It's just, it was becoming such a part of my day-to-day life, and I didn't have anybody really to speak to about it that came from my perspective. So I just knew I knew there were others like me. I didn't know if there were any in Vancouver, but I had to get out there and figure it out regardless. So I joined a Facebook group, Vancouver Vegans, and I saw some postings. The first one I saw was something to do with a vigil at a slaughterhouse down on Commercial Drive there. So I just, a couple weeks went by, and finally I said to myself, no more excuses. I just got to get up and do this before I have one more argument with one more person that doesn't understand what the hell I'm talking about. So I took myself down there, and I stood with a sign. I saw the chickens at a slaughterhouse. It was very brutal. It was, seeing it on video was one thing, but once I was there, it was the sights and the sounds and the actual animals suffering. That was, it was just a full kind of paradigm shift for me. At that point, I knew I couldn't just have those conversations with people that weren't willing to listen to me anymore. For myself, I needed to get out there and start spending my time, putting myself, I guess you could say, more right in the field of things. We focus on pressure campaigns. So we have a history of doing things like foie gras, shark fin soup, and currently we're going against Canada Goose for their coyote fur trims. So basically what we do is we show up at a business, that's fairly prevalent for selling these products. We do our best to educate them and see what the stance is and see if they're willing to start working with us towards making a shift away and more towards the ethical. And if it gets to the point where they just have no interest in doing that at all, then we feel it's our need to kind of step in and put a little pressure on the business. For the current campaign against Brooklyn Clothing in Yaletown against Canada Goose, we going into our third year now of weekly. We started out bi-weekly protests, and now we've shifted towards weekly and taking the summers off because they're not selling the fur anymore. But we basically show up and we stay until you're willing to make the change as a business. To the best of my knowledge, when the campaign started against Canada Goose, we literally went on the website of Canada Goose and saw what retailers were carrying the products within Vancouver. At the time, it was a list of about 14 3 years ago, so we literally just started going down the list. Brooklyn Clothing was the third on the list. The other two actually dropped it, one of them being Grouse Mountain Outfitters. So that was a pretty big victory, and Brooklyn Clothing is just turns out to be the most stubborn and least willing to change. Yeah. The pressure campaign is just showing up and having a continued presence so that the people in the area and the community can get involved. If they want to, they can give their feedback to the store that's not really willing to listen to us. And at the same time, try and educate the public on the cruelty behind things like the fur industry. Yeah, we're there with signs, we're doing periodic chanting, say every 15 minutes or so for a couple hours. We don't go any longer than that. A big thing in the activist community is burnout, and as I said before, with like my day-to-day life with people in it, just trying to advocate for animals within that, it takes a big toll. Something that you're so passionate about, and you've seen all these terrible things happen to these animals. You've kind of woken up yourself, but there are people in your life that aren't really ready yet, or maybe they just haven't reached that point. So that alone takes a lot. And then taking yourself and your ego or your anxiety and going out into the streets and trying to deal with the public whom of which you don't even know, they're just strangers to you. That's a big toll in itself, and people are not going to react the best ways sometimes, and especially when it comes to eating animals, wearing animals, using them for experiments. Like, those are things that people, they tighten up really quickly when you start challenging them on it, because it's one thing that I think as humans we all try to push away really far into like deeper places in our thoughts so that we can kind of justify the things that we're doing in our day-to-day without having to, recognize the reality of it. I think the best way to get involved in activism is to find what works best for an individual. I know a lot of people, just going up to a person on the street with, say, a leaflet. Like when I started doing that, like those were the people that I had always tried to avoid walking down the street, cross the street or just walk around them, pretend that I'm on my phone or something like that. So like I always had that in the back of my mind when I was a person with a stack of leaflets trying to give that out. So things like that are always going to be uncomfortable unless they are comfortable. And I think it's really up to the person whether or not they want to push themselves. I enjoy doing all forms of activism, but for the people that, I don't think it's necessary to put yourself outside your comfort zone to speak for animals. So whether, it's easy to write an email or write a self-written letter, or you can go to the organizations and see if they need any help with just administration or anything like that. Or if you're more creative, like filmmaking or stuff like that. I think it's important to find what works for you in order not to burn out and be able to still speak for animals at the same time. I think when you first go vegan, you are going to find a plethora of information and a plethora of conflicting information. You'll find vegans that'll say, eating raw is the best thing in the world. Raw till 4, eat bananas and rice all day. You're gonna find vegans that say you need to eat more fats, take your B12. You're gonna find a lot of information. And I think it's a real learning process. And there's not ever gonna be one place where you're gonna find everything that you need. So it's a hard process, because when we grow up eating as children, we're literally just taking what's been put in front of us. And most of the time our parents are just putting what's in front of us, what was put in front of them when they were kids, without any real thought behind it. So I think it's a real special process to take yourself on, because you're taking control over who, what, and where you're getting the things that you're putting into your own body. And it does take a while to learn how to eat for the rest of your life now, but I think it's important in perspective of, taking into account like your health, taking into account the well-being of others, for animals, for the people making your food, the people picking your food, on plantations or in farms or anything like that. It's just, I don't think it's anything to do overnight. I think making the decision to start the process of changing overnight is a good thing. But I think if you're doing that just because you want to help animals and all you're eating is lettuce every day for the rest of your life, then you might set yourself up to a position where it's no longer a healthy thing for you, and that doesn't help an individual, and I don't think that helps the animals. So I think taking as much information as you can, and and just experiment.